Imagine a 15-year-old boy risking everything, sprinting across an airport runway, shouting warnings about a sabotaged plane, only to uncover a web of danger far bigger than he could have imagined. This is the story of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary journey that follows. Will his actions save lives, or will they lead him into even greater peril? Stick around to find out. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. Malik Thompson adjusted the weight of his tattered backpack as he trudged down the cracked sidewalk of his neighborhood. The late afternoon sun bore down on the small, run-down houses, their peeling paint and sagging porches a reflection of the residents' daily struggles. For Malik, life had always felt like an uphill climb, but lately the hill had turned into a mountain. His mother, Vanessa, worked tirelessly as a janitor, scrubbing floors and cleaning offices until her hands were raw, yet they were still months behind on rent. The eviction notice pinned to their front door that morning had been the final straw. "Don't worry, Malik. We'll figure this out," Vanessa had said, her voice strained but still full of that relentless optimism she clung to. He knew her words were more for her own comfort than his. Malik had seen the look in her eyes as she stuffed the crumpled notice into her bag. Defeat, fear, and the faint glimmer of hope she tried to keep alive for his sake. As Malik approached the main road, the distant roar of planes grew louder. The airport loomed ahead, its sprawling runways and shiny jets a stark contrast to the faded world he came from. He headed toward his usual spot near the hangars, a neglected strip of land littered with trash. Collecting aluminum cans here was Malik's way of contributing. Every dollar he earned went toward groceries or the electric bill. It wasn't much, but it was something. His sneakers crunched against the gravel as he bent to pick up a can, the hot metal burning his fingers slightly. He glanced at the jets parked in the distance, their pristine exteriors gleaming in the sunlight. Malik often wondered what it would be like to step inside one of those planes, to leave Atlanta behind, even if only for a moment. But daydreams didn't pay the rent, and the reality of their eviction notice brought him crashing back down. "Hey kid, you don't belong here." A sharp voice jolted Malik out of his thoughts. He turned to see a burly security guard approaching, his uniform stretched tight over his broad shoulders. "I'm just picking up cans," Malik said, holding up his bag as evidence. "Not causing any trouble." The guard scowled, his narrowed eyes scanning Malik from head to toe. "Don't care. Stay too long and I'll call the cops. Understand?" Malik nodded, his jaw clenched. He was used to being dismissed, treated as if his very presence was a problem. Without another word, he moved farther down the perimeter, keeping his head low. The sound of the guard's heavy boots faded, but the knot in Malik's stomach remained. As he worked, Malik's thoughts turned to his mother. He hated seeing her so worn down, trying to stretch every dollar while pretending things were fine. It wasn't fair. She deserved better. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and glanced toward the hangars again. Something caught his eye. A figure in dark clothing moving near one of the private jets. The person seemed to be checking something under the wing, glancing around nervously. Malik squinted, his curiosity piqued. The figure didn't look like the workers he usually saw. They were always in uniforms, moving with purpose. This person, however, was different, furtive, almost like they didn't belong there. Malik felt a chill despite the heat. What were they doing? He debated approaching one of the workers, but the memory of the guard's hostility held him back. No one would listen to a kid like him. He was just Malik Thompson, the boy collecting cans to keep the lights on. A screech of tires pulled his attention back to the road. He turned to see a sleek black car pulling into the lot. The door opened and out stepped a man in a sharp gray suit. Even from a distance, Malik recognized him. Victor Grayson, a local philanthropist and businessman. Grayson was often on the news, donating to charities or cutting ribbons at grand openings. He was the kind of person Malik's mother admired, but never expected to meet. Grayson moved with confidence, surrounded by assistants carrying briefcases and clipboards. Malik's gaze flicked back to the figure near the jet. They were still there, crouched low as if avoiding attention. The unease in Malik's chest grew. Should he say something? What if he was wrong? But what if he wasn't? He shoved the thought aside and focused on his task. After all, he had bigger problems to worry about, like where he and Vanessa would go if they were kicked out of their apartment. That night, Malik returned home, his bag of cans heavier than usual, but his heart just as heavy. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, a stack of unpaid bills in front of her. She looked up as he entered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "You okay, honey?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Malik lied, setting the bag down. "I got a lot today." "Good. Every little bit helps." Vanessa's voice wavered, but she quickly turned her attention back to the papers, scribbling notes in the margins. Malik stood there for a moment, watching her. He wanted to say something, to tell her about the strange man at the airport. But the words wouldn't come. What good would it do? They had enough to worry about. As he headed to bed, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His thoughts drifted back to the figure by the jet, the furtive movements, the nervous glances. The memory stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his mind as he lay staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would go back. Maybe he couldn't fix everything, but he had to try. The restless thoughts from the previous night lingered with Malik as he walked back to the airport the next morning. The memory of the mysterious figure by the jet had etched itself into his mind, refusing to fade. He'd tried to convince himself it was none of his business, but the unease gnawed at him. Something about the man's movements didn't sit right, and Malik knew he had to see if he was still there. The air near the airport was thick and humid, carrying the faint smell of fuel and asphalt. Planes roared overhead, their shadows passing over Malik as he approached the hangars. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, now lighter after cashing in the cans from yesterday. The money barely made a dent in what they needed, but at least it was something. Malik made his way toward the perimeter fence, keeping a careful eye on his surroundings. Workers moved busily around the tarmac, their fluorescent vests glowing in the morning sun. His usual spot near the trash bins felt oddly deserted. He crouched down, pretending to sift through scattered cans, while his eyes darted toward the row of private jets. There it was again, the same man, dressed in black, moving near one of the smaller jets. This time, the figure wasn't just crouched. He was actively tampering with a panel on the underside of the wing. Malik's heart thudded in his chest as he watched. The man's hands moved quickly, unscrewing something, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like he was expecting to be caught. Malik swallowed hard. He needed to tell someone, but who would listen? The memory of the security guard's scorn from yesterday flashed in his mind. To them, he was just a kid hanging around where he didn't belong. His gaze shifted to a nearby worker unloading cargo from a truck. Maybe they would take him seriously. "Excuse me," Malik called out, his voice cracking slightly as he approached the worker. The man, tall with a broad frame and a clipboard in hand, turned to look at him. His brow furrowed and his expression quickly turned to impatience. "What is it, kid?" the worker asked, his voice gruff. "You're not supposed to be here." "There's a guy messing with that jet over there," Malik said, pointing toward the hangar. "I think he's up to something. It doesn't look right." The worker followed Malik's gesture, squinting toward the plane. After a moment, he shrugged, uninterested. "Probably maintenance. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, kid." "I'm serious." Malik's voice rose. "He's not wearing a uniform or anything. He's acting like he doesn't want anyone to see him." The worker sighed heavily, shaking his head. "Look, I've got a job to do. I don't have time for this. Go on home before you get in trouble." Malik clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. Why wouldn't anyone listen? He turned back toward the jet, but the man in black had vanished. The panel the man had been working on was closed, leaving no trace of his activity. Malik cursed under his breath. It was like trying to shout into a void. No one cared. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. What if he was right, and no one acted? The thought made his stomach churn. He picked up his backpack and began walking along the fence, keeping an eye on the jets. His mind raced with questions. Who was that man? What was he doing? And why did he seem so out of place? As Malik rounded a corner, he spotted a familiar face. Clara Jenkins, the maintenance worker he'd seen yesterday, was talking to a colleague near a utility cart. Malik hesitated for a moment before approaching her. "Hey," he said cautiously, his voice low. Clara turned, her brow arching in surprise. "You again? What are you doing back here?" "There's a guy," Malik began, his words tumbling out quickly. "He's messing with one of the jets. I saw him yesterday too. I think something's wrong." Clara's expression shifted to one of mild concern. She glanced toward the hangars, then back at Malik. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," Malik said firmly. "He's not wearing a uniform, and he keeps looking around like he doesn't want to be seen." Clara sighed, her gaze thoughtful. "Okay, I'll check it out, but you need to stay out of trouble. Got it?" Malik nodded, relief washing over him. Finally, someone was taking him seriously. Clara grabbed a radio from her utility belt and spoke briefly into it before heading toward the jet. Malik stayed back, his heart pounding as he watched her approach. She stopped near the panel, inspecting it carefully. After a few minutes, she turned and walked back toward Malik, her expression unreadable. "Nothing seems out of place," Clara said, her tone cautious. "But I'll report it just to be safe. You should head home, kid. Let us handle it." Malik nodded, though disappointment pricked at him. He had hoped for more, something concrete to prove he wasn't imagining things. As he walked away, the roar of a jet engine filled the air, and he glanced up to see a plane taking off. The image of the man in black burned in his mind, his unease growing with every step. As Malik walked away from the airport that day, Clara's words echoed in his mind. "Let us handle it." She had meant well, but deep down, Malik knew no one truly understood the urgency of what he had seen. His unease didn't fade, it only grew stronger. The image of the mysterious man crouched under the jet stayed with him like a shadow. And despite Clara's reassurances, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. That night, sitting at the small kitchen table while his mother reviewed yet another stack of bills, Malik felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him. The eviction notice was propped against a jar of pencils, a glaring reminder of how precarious their lives had become. Vanessa, exhausted and still in her janitor's uniform, looked up and managed a faint smile. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle but weary. Malik hesitated, the truth balanced on the tip of his tongue. He wanted to tell her about the strange man, about how no one would listen to him, but instead he shrugged. "Same as usual," he said. "Picked up a lot of cans today." "Good," Vanessa replied, nodding. "Every bit helps." She glanced at the eviction notice, her smile faltering. "We'll figure this out, Malik. We always do." But Malik wasn't so sure this time. He could see the toll their struggles were taking on her, how the spark in her eyes had dimmed over the years. It wasn't fair. She deserved better than this endless cycle of stress and exhaustion. Later that night, as the apartment fell silent and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the air, Malik lay awake staring at the ceiling. His thoughts raced with a mixture of frustration and determination. He couldn't stand by and do nothing, not when their entire world was on the brink of collapse, and not when he knew something dangerous was happening at the airport. Malik sat up, his mind made up. He couldn't depend on others to take action. If no one else cared, then he would have to find a way to prove what he had seen. The next morning, Malik left the apartment earlier than usual, the sun barely cresting over the rooftops as he made his way back to the airport. His backpack, filled with a few cans and his worn notebook, swung at his side. His plan was simple: find more evidence. If he could catch the man in black in the act, maybe then someone would listen. The streets were quiet, the usual morning bustle still an hour away. Malik's sneakers slapped against the pavement as he neared the perimeter fence. He crouched low, pretending to search for cans, his eyes scanning the row of private jets. Workers moved about, prepping planes for the day, their voices carrying faintly over the roar of engines. At first, everything seemed normal. Malik watched for nearly an hour, his nerves fraying with each passing minute. Just as he began to question himself, a flash of movement caught his attention. Near one of the smaller jets, the man in black reappeared, crouched low by the fuel tank. Malik's heart raced. This was his chance. He gripped the fence tightly, watching as the man unscrewed a panel and slipped something inside. It was small, almost unnoticeable. But the man's furtive glances confirmed Malik's suspicions. This was no routine maintenance. Without thinking, Malik pulled out his phone and snapped a series of photos, his hands trembling. The man moved quickly, finishing whatever he was doing and disappearing into the shadows of the hangar. Malik stayed frozen for a moment, his mind spinning. He finally had proof. But what could he do with it? Who would believe him now? Clara had tried to help before, but even she didn't seem convinced. Malik knew he needed to act fast, before it was too late. As he stood, clutching his phone like a lifeline, a new thought struck him. The man in the gray suit, Victor Grayson, he was important, powerful. If anyone could take Malik seriously, it would be him. Taking a deep breath, Malik started toward the airport offices, his resolve hardening with every step. He didn't know how he would get past security, or if Grayson would even listen to him. All he knew was that he had to try. His mother's tired smile flashed in his mind, and he gritted his teeth. This wasn't just about the airport anymore. This was about survival. His, Vanessa's, and maybe even others who didn't yet know how much danger they were in. Malik gripped his phone tightly as he approached the airport offices. The weight of what he had seen pressed heavily on his chest. He had the photos, the proof, but what would happen next depended entirely on whether someone chose to believe him. His plan was shaky at best. All he knew was that Victor Grayson was the one person who might listen. Malik's heart raced as he weaved his way toward the hangars, careful to stay out of sight of the security guards, who already thought of him as nothing more than a nuisance. The sun was climbing higher now, bathing the tarmac in a harsh glare. Workers bustled about, and the sound of engines roared in the background. Malik scanned the area, his eyes locking onto the sleek private jet at the center of his attention. Grayson and his entourage were gathered nearby, their polished suits and confident strides a stark contrast to Malik's worn sneakers and hand-me-down hoodie. Swallowing hard, Malik stepped forward. He didn't make it far before a security guard noticed him. "Hey, kid, not you again," the guard barked, starting toward him. Malik froze but didn't back down. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Wait, I have something important to tell Mr. Grayson." The commotion caught Grayson's attention. He turned, his sharp gaze falling on Malik. The guards hesitated, looking to Grayson for direction. Malik seized the moment. "Please, you have to listen," Malik yelled, his desperation clear. "Your plane, it's been tampered with. I have proof." Grayson frowned, his expression shifting from annoyance to curiosity. He raised a hand, signaling the guards to hold back. Malik stepped closer, holding up his phone. "I saw someone messing with the fuel tank," Malik said, his voice trembling but determined. "Look at the photos. I'm not making this up." Grayson hesitated for a moment before taking the phone. His assistants leaned in, their faces darkening as they scrolled through the images. The room seemed to freeze, tension hanging heavy in the air. "Call maintenance," Grayson ordered, his voice low but firm. "Have them inspect the plane immediately." Malik exhaled, relief washing over him, but his nerves were far from settled. The workers arrived quickly, swarming the jet with tools and scanners. Malik stood off to the side, his hands balled into fists as he watched the scene unfold. Minutes felt like hours as the maintenance crew worked. Finally, one of them shouted, "Over here, there's something lodged near the fuel line." Grayson stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "What is it?" The worker pulled out a small, unmarked device, carefully handing it to a supervisor. The discovery sent a ripple of unease through the group. Grayson turned back to Malik, his expression unreadable. "You're saying you saw someone plant this?" Grayson asked, his tone sharp. "Yes," Malik replied without hesitation. "I saw him twice, yesterday and this morning. I knew something wasn't right." Grayson's face darkened. He gestured toward one of his assistants. "Find out who had access to this plane in the last 48 hours. I want answers." The air grew thick with tension. Malik shifted on his feet, unsure of what to do now. Grayson approached him, his gaze steady. "You might have just saved a lot of lives, kid," Grayson said. "But this isn't over. If what you're saying is true, someone out there is trying to sabotage my planes, and I need to know why." Malik nodded, feeling both relief and a strange sense of validation. For the first time, someone important was listening to him. But the moment was short-lived. A commotion near the hangar drew everyone's attention. Two security guards were wrestling with a man, dragging him toward the group. "That's him!" Malik blurted out, pointing. "That's the guy I saw!" The man struggled, his face flushed as he yelled profanities. The guards tightened their grip, forcing him to the ground. Grayson's expression hardened as he stepped closer. "Who are you?" Grayson demanded, his voice cold. "And what were you doing near my plane?" The man glared up at him, refusing to speak. Grayson nodded to the guards. "Get the authorities here. I want him questioned." Malik watched as the man was dragged away, his defiance etched into every step. A chill ran down Malik's spine. This wasn't just about one plane. It felt bigger, more dangerous than he'd imagined. Grayson turned back to Malik, his expression softening slightly. "What's your name?" "Malik Thompson," he replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Grayson nodded. "Malik, you've done something remarkable today. You didn't just see something wrong, you acted on it. That takes courage." Malik felt his cheeks flush, unsure how to respond. Grayson continued. "Where do you live? Is your family here?" "It's just me and my mom," Malik said. "We live not far from here." Grayson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I'd like to meet her. Someone raised you right." Malik hesitated but nodded. "Okay, but is the plane safe now?" Grayson smiled faintly. "Thanks to you, it will be. You gave us the time we needed to prevent a disaster." The tension in Malik's chest eased slightly. For the first time in days, he felt like he'd made a difference. As Grayson's team worked to secure the jet, Malik stood off to the side, a strange mix of pride and exhaustion settling over him. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her tired smile, her quiet strength. He had to tell her what had happened. Maybe, just maybe, things would start to change for them. As Malik walked away from the airport with Grayson's words echoing in his mind, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the day settling over him. The sight of the saboteur being dragged away was satisfying, but Malik knew this wasn't over. Questions swirled in his mind. Why had this man targeted the jet, and what had he hoped to accomplish? For the moment, though, Malik's only focus was getting home and telling his mother what had happened. When Malik opened the door to their small apartment, Vanessa was standing by the kitchen counter, sorting through a pile of papers. She looked up, startled by the intensity in her son's face. "Malik?" she asked, setting the papers down. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated, unsure of how to begin. I need to tell you something. You're not going to believe this." Vanessa motioned for him to sit at the table. She pulled out a chair for herself, her expression both curious and concerned. Malik recounted everything from the strange man at the airport to his desperate plea to Victor Grayson. His words tumbled out in a rush, his hands gesturing animatedly as he described how the maintenance crew had found the device. Vanessa's eyes widened with every detail, and by the time Malik finished, she was gripping the edge of the table. "Malik, do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if they hadn't listened? What if that man had seen you?" "I didn't have a choice, Mom," Malik replied. "I couldn't just let it happen. What if the plane had taken off with that thing on it? People could have died." Vanessa leaned back, her hand covering her mouth. "You're right," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. I can't believe my son was the one to stop something so terrible." "Grayson wants to meet you," Malik added, his voice quieter now. "He said he wants to talk to us. I think he wants to help." Vanessa blinked, trying to process the enormity of what Malik was saying. "Victor Grayson, the man on the news, he wants to meet us?" Malik nodded, unsure of how she would react. To his surprise, Vanessa broke into a smile, a small, hesitant one, but genuine nonetheless. "Malik, I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice breaking. "You did something incredible." The next day, Malik and Vanessa arrived at the address Grayson had provided. It was a sleek office building downtown, its glass facade gleaming in the morning light. Malik felt out of place as they stepped into the grand lobby, but Vanessa held his hand tightly, her own nerves barely concealed. Grayson met them personally, his warm smile immediately putting them at ease. He shook Vanessa's hand firmly, his gaze sincere. "Mrs. Thompson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your son is a remarkable young man." Vanessa flushed, her grip on Malik's hand tightening. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this. Grayson gestured for them to follow him into a spacious conference room. The table was already set with refreshments, but neither Malik nor Vanessa touched them. Grayson sat across from them, his demeanor calm yet focused. I wanted to thank you both personally, Grayson began, addressing them with a gravity that made Malik sit up straighter. Malik's actions yesterday prevented what could have been a tragedy. I've already spoken to the authorities and they're investigating the man who tampered with the plane. But there's something I want to discuss. Vanessa glanced at Malik, her expression wary but intrigued. What is it? I understand that times have been tough for your family, Grayson said. Malik mentioned your struggles and I want to help, not just because of what he did for me, but because it's the right thing to do. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Grayson, we don't expect— I know you don't, Grayson interrupted gently. But I have the means to help, and I'd like to. Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to offer you a job at one of my offices here in Atlanta. It's a stable position with benefits, and as for your rent, consider it taken care of. Vanessa covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Grayson said with a smile. He turned to Malik. And you, young man, your courage and quick thinking have inspired me. I'd like to introduce you to some people who run an aviation program for students. I think you'd thrive there. Malik's eyes widened. You mean I could learn about planes for real? For real, Grayson said with a chuckle. You've got a sharp eye and a brave heart, Malik. I'd like to see where that can take you. Malik glanced at his mother, who nodded through her tears. Yes, he said firmly. Thank you. Grayson leaned back, his smile warm. Good. Then let's get started. Malik and Vanessa left Grayson's office with a strange mix of relief and disbelief. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. Grayson's generosity had lifted a burden neither of them could bear alone. As they walked home, Malik's mind buzzed with questions about the saboteur, the aviation program Grayson mentioned, and what their future might hold. Yet beneath his excitement, unease lingered. Something about the entire ordeal didn't sit right. The next morning, Malik woke early. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the blinds as he sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through news articles on his phone. Reports about the airport sabotage had started to surface. The authorities had confirmed the man's arrest, but no motive had been revealed. Malik tapped on one of the articles, scanning the details. Local businessman Victor Grayson credits teenager Malik Thompson for alerting him to the potential threat, the article read. Malik's chest swelled with pride, but it was short-lived. The article continued. The suspect, identified as James Porter, refused to cooperate with authorities. Sources suggest he has connections to a larger group with unknown motives. Larger group? Malik's stomach churned. He hadn't considered the possibility that Porter wasn't acting alone. Vanessa entered the kitchen, her freshly ironed blouse a sign of her new job. She paused, noticing Malik's tense expression. What's wrong? She asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. They think the guy I saw isn't working alone, Malik replied, showing her the article. What if it's not over? Vanessa set down her mug, her brow furrowing. Malik, you did what you needed to do. The authorities are handling it now. Don't let this weigh on you. But it did. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that Porter's silence wasn't just defiance. It was strategy. Later that day, Malik returned to the airport, this time as part of Grayson's invitation to tour the aviation program. The facility was unlike anything Malik had ever seen. Rows of engines, flight simulators, and sleek models filled the space. Malik's awe was momentarily interrupted when Grayson approached, his expression grave. Malik, can we talk? Grayson asked, gesturing for him to step aside. They moved to a quieter corner of the hangar, where Grayson's usually warm demeanor was replaced by something more guarded. The authorities have been questioning Porter, Grayson began. He's not saying much, but they've pieced together something troubling. Malik's throat tightened. What is it? Grayson hesitated. Porter wasn't targeting just my plane. There's evidence to suggest he's part of a coordinated effort targeting multiple high-profile flights. It's bigger than I thought. Malik's heart pounded. What does that mean for you? For the airport? It means we're not dealing with one saboteur, Grayson said. And it means we need to stay vigilant. Malik, you saw him twice. Did he ever say or do anything that might help us figure out what's going on? Malik thought back, replaying the events in his mind. No, he said slowly. But when they caught him, he didn't seem scared. It was like he knew something we didn't. Grayson's jaw tightened. That's what worries me. As they spoke, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Security guards were ushering in a man in a crisp suit, his expression tense. Grayson excused himself, leaving Malik alone to watch from a distance. The man and Grayson spoke in hushed tones before disappearing into a private office. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something critical was unfolding. He wandered back to the program area, his curiosity gnawing at him. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't over, and he wasn't sure he could just sit by and wait for answers. Later that evening, back at home, Malik shared the day's events with Vanessa. She listened intently, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Malik, I know you feel like you have to do something, she said softly. But sometimes the bravest thing is to trust others to handle it. Malik nodded, though her words didn't ease his restlessness. As Vanessa retired for the night, Malik stayed up, staring out the window at the quiet street below. He couldn't explain why, but he felt like the truth wasn't done unraveling and somehow he was still part of it. The weight of Grayson's revelation lingered in Malik's mind long after their conversation. The idea of a coordinated effort targeting planes sent a chill down his spine. Even as he tried to focus on his mother's newfound excitement about her job, the specter of danger loomed in the back of his thoughts. He knew he had stumbled into something far bigger than he'd imagined. But he also knew he couldn't turn back now. 2 days later, Malik found himself back at the aviation program, the buzz of activity a temporary distraction from the worries swirling in his head. He stood by a flight simulator, watching as one of the instructors guided a student through a mock takeoff. The hum of the machine and the instructor's calm explanations filled the space, grounding Malik in a way he hadn't expected. Impressive, isn't it? Grayson's voice broke through Malik's thoughts. He turned to see the businessman standing beside him, his gaze fixed on the simulator. Yeah, Malik replied. I never thought I'd get to see something like this up close. Grayson smiled, but it was faint, as if his mind was elsewhere. Malik, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to act the way you did. Malik looked down, embarrassed but proud. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. Grayson nodded, his expression softening. That instinct is rare. Hold on to it. As they spoke, a woman in a sharp navy blazer approached. Her stride was purposeful, and her piercing gaze immediately commanded attention. She extended a hand toward Malik. You must be Malik Thompson, she said. I'm Agent Warren with the FAA's investigative team. Mr. Grayson has told me about you. Malik hesitated before shaking her hand. Is everything okay? Not quite, Warren replied, her tone measured. We've been tracking Porter's activities and his connections. The device you reported wasn't just designed to sabotage the plane, it was set to trigger remotely. Whoever he's working with might still be out there. Malik's stomach dropped. So, it's not over? No, Warren said firmly, but your information has been invaluable. You've helped us prevent something catastrophic. We're working on the rest. Grayson placed a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. They're doing everything they can, Malik. You've already done so much. Malik nodded, though the news did little to settle his nerves. As Warren excused herself to join another conversation, Grayson turned back to Malik. I have a proposition for you, Grayson said. How would you like to officially join the aviation program? We can arrange for you to learn everything from mechanics to flight navigation. You've got an eye for detail, and I think you'd thrive here. Malik's eyes widened. Seriously? Seriously, Grayson replied with a grin. You've proven you're more than capable. This could be the start of something great for you. Malik's mind raced. The idea of being part of the program felt like a dream, but it also felt right. For the first time, he could see a future that wasn't weighed down by worry and survival. I'd love that, Malik said, his voice steady with newfound confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." Grayson smiled. "You've earned it." Later that evening, Malik shared the news with Vanessa. Her reaction was a mix of disbelief and pride. She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "Malik, this is everything I've ever wanted for you. A chance to follow your dreams." Malik smiled, his chest swelling with hope. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You're the reason I keep going." That night, Malik sat by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he had a chance to shape it, and that was more than he had ever dared to hope for. Malik woke the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of Agent Warren's words still lingered, but the weight of her revelation was balanced by Grayson's offer. For the first time, Malik saw a path forward, one that wasn't mired in struggle but illuminated with opportunity. As he arrived at the aviation program's training center, Malik felt a surge of nervous energy. The facility was bustling with activity. Students in uniforms walked briskly between classrooms, and instructors demonstrated complex maneuvers on intricate machinery. Everything felt larger than life, and Malik couldn't help but feel small in the midst of it all. "Malik!" a voice called. It was one of the program coordinators, Mr. Lee, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and an approachable demeanor. "Welcome to your first day. Ready to dive in?" Malik nodded, his heart pounding. "Yeah, I'm ready." Mr. Lee led Malik through the facility, explaining the various stages of training. From learning the fundamentals of aerodynamics to hands-on work with engines, it was clear the program was as rigorous as it was rewarding. Malik's awe grew with every passing moment, his worries about fitting in slowly fading. "Everyone starts somewhere," Mr. Lee said, as if sensing Malik's hesitation. "It's not about where you've been, it's about where you're going." Those words stuck with Malik as he joined his first session, a workshop on basic mechanics. The instructor, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Garcia, handed him a set of tools and paired him with a teammate, a boy around his age named Jalen. Jalen was friendly, with a quick wit that eased Malik's nerves. As they worked together to disassemble and reassemble a small engine, Malik found himself immersed in the process. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts weren't consumed by fear or doubt. He was learning, building something with his own hands, and it felt good. By the end of the day, Malik was exhausted but exhilarated. Jalen clapped him on the shoulder as they cleaned up their work area. "Not bad for a first-timer," he said with a grin. "You're going to fit in just fine." Malik smiled, feeling a spark of confidence. "Thanks. It feels right being here." As Malik walked home, the city seemed brighter somehow. When he entered the apartment, Vanessa was waiting for him, her expression eager. "How was it?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. Malik dropped his backpack and hugged her tightly. "It was amazing, Mom. I think this is where I'm meant to be." Vanessa pulled back, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Malik. You deserve this." That night, Malik sat by the window, the hum of the city below a soothing backdrop. He thought about how far they'd come, from the eviction notice looming over them to this moment of hope and possibility. For the first time, Malik believed in a future where he and Vanessa could thrive. The horizon was no longer just a distant dream. It was within reach, and Malik was ready to seize it. Malik's days at the aviation program began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings were spent in classrooms, learning the science and mechanics of flight, while afternoons were hands-on, working alongside peers to tackle complex tasks. It was demanding, but Malik welcomed the challenge. Each day brought new hurdles, but also new victories. For every bolt he struggled to loosen, every equation he couldn't solve at first, there was a breakthrough waiting to prove his determination. Despite the excitement of learning, there were moments of doubt. On his second week, Malik faced his first major test, a group project to diagnose and repair a simulated engine failure. The task was daunting, and Malik found himself paired with students who had more experience. Jalen was there, encouraging as always, but the others seemed skeptical of Malik's ability to keep up. "Are you sure you've got this?" One of them, a tall, confident girl named Kiara, asked, her tone more challenging than supportive. Malik swallowed his frustration. I'll figure it out, he said, gripping the wrench tighter than necessary. The simulation began, and the group scrambled to identify the issue. Malik threw himself into the task, his mind racing as he recalled lessons from the past few days. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked, aware of Kiara's critical gaze. Minutes ticked by and progress was slow. Malik could feel the weight of his team's expectations pressing down on him. But then, a thought struck him. A small discrepancy in the readings from one of the gauges. A detail he almost missed. Malik stopped, double-checking his work before speaking up. "It's the fuel pressure regulator," he said, his voice firm. "That's why the engine's stalling." The group paused, looking at him in surprise. Kiara raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "If you're sure, let's go with it." Malik nodded, his confidence growing as they worked to replace the faulty component. When the engine roared to life moments later, Malik's relief was matched only by the satisfaction of proving himself. Jalen clapped him on the back. "Told you you'd kill it." Even Kiara managed a grudging smile. "Not bad, Malik. Not bad at all." That evening, Malik returned home with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. Vanessa greeted him at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of his smile. "Good day?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. Malik nodded, sinking into the couch. "I'm getting the hang of it, Mom. It's hard, but it's worth it." Vanessa sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You've always been capable, Malik. I'm so proud of you for sticking with it." Her words stayed with him as the days turned into weeks. The program wasn't just teaching him about aviation. It was teaching him about resilience, teamwork, and the value of perseverance. Each new challenge strengthened his resolve, and each triumph reminded him of why he was there. One evening, as Malik studied at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed with a message from Grayson. It was a simple note, but it filled Malik with a renewed sense of purpose. "Keep pushing forward. Great things are ahead." Malik looked over at Vanessa, who was humming softly as she tidied the living room. The weight that had once hung over their lives felt lighter now. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving step by step, challenge by challenge. The future still held uncertainties, but Malik was no longer afraid of them. He had faced trials and come out stronger, and with every new day, he was learning how to soar. The weeks that followed Malik's breakthrough at the aviation program were a whirlwind of progress and praise. His instructors took notice of his sharp eye for detail and his determination to succeed. It wasn't long before word of his story began to spread beyond the walls of the training center. Malik wasn't just a promising student. He was a young man who had saved lives through sheer courage and quick thinking. It started with a small feature in the local paper. Malik nearly missed it until Jalen slapped the article down on the workbench during a break. "You've gone viral. Well, small-town viral," Jalen teased, his grin wide. "This is just the beginning, man." The headline read, "Teen Hero Prevents Aviation Disaster, Inspires Change." Malik's cheeks flushed as he scanned the article. It detailed his actions at the airport, his enrollment in the program, and even highlighted Vanessa's new job as a sign of their rising fortunes. The reporter's words were kind, almost reverent, and Malik felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. "It's weird seeing my name in print," Malik admitted, folding the paper and tucking it into his backpack. "I didn't do this to be famous." "Maybe not," Jalen said, clapping him on the back. "But you deserve the recognition." The article caught the attention of more than just his classmates. A few days later, Malik and Vanessa were invited to a local community center event. Organized by Grayson and other civic leaders, it was a celebration of Malik's bravery and the positive changes in their lives. Vanessa was hesitant at first, worried about the attention, but Malik convinced her to go. "This isn't just about me," he told her. "It's about us. About everything we've been through." When the night of the event arrived, Malik stepped into the brightly lit hall, feeling both out of place and deeply honored. The room was filled with people from their neighborhood and beyond. Banners with words like courage, resilience, and community hung on the walls. Grayson greeted them at the door, his smile warm and genuine. "You look sharp," he said, shaking Malik's hand. "This night is for you, Malik. Enjoy it." As the event unfolded, speakers shared stories of how Malik's actions had inspired them. A local youth mentor spoke about the importance of standing up for what's right, using Malik's story as a shining example. Malik's heart swelled when he saw Vanessa smiling in the audience, her eyes shining with pride. When it was Malik's turn to speak, he stepped onto the small stage, his palms sweating as he gripped the microphone. The crowd fell silent, their attention entirely on him. He cleared his throat, the words catching briefly before they flowed naturally. "I'm not a hero," he began, his voice steady. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and couldn't look the other way. My mom taught me that when you have the chance to make a difference, you take it." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't just my story. It's about all of us, about what we can do when we work together and support each other. None of this would have been possible without my mom, Mr. Grayson, and so many others who believed in me." The applause that followed was thunderous. Malik felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. This was more than recognition. It was belonging. For the first time, he felt truly seen and valued, not just for what he had done, but for who he was becoming. After the event, people approached Malik and Vanessa, offering congratulations and words of encouragement. Grayson pulled them aside as the crowd thinned, his expression serious but kind. "Malik, this is just the beginning," he said. "You've proven that you have the heart and the drive to succeed. Whatever you choose to do next, I'll be here to support you." Malik nodded, his gratitude too immense for words. He looked at Vanessa, who was talking animatedly with a group of neighbors, her smile brighter than he had seen in years. They had come so far, and though the future was still uncertain, Malik knew they could face it together. As they walked home that night, Malik held the small plaque he had been given at the event, its inscription simple but powerful, "In honor of courage and community." He looked up at the stars, his heart full. "This is just the beginning," he whispered to himself, a small smile on his lips. As Malik sat on his bed, the small plaque from the community event resting on his lap, he felt the gravity of the journey he and his mother had endured. The evening had been filled with warmth and pride, but now, in the quiet of his room, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Each decision he had made, each leap of faith, had brought them to this point. The recognition wasn't just for his courage, it was for the resilience he and his mother had shown together. The next morning, Malik woke early. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the faint light of dawn began to creep through the blinds. He rubbed his eyes and grabbed his phone, opening an email Grayson had sent the night before. It outlined the next steps for his involvement in the aviation program, but one sentence stood out. "We believe you have the potential for leadership, Malik. Let's see where this can take you." Malik sat up straighter. Leadership. It was a word that carried weight, responsibility, and trust. It wasn't something he had ever associated with himself, but Grayson's belief sparked something deep within him, a new sense of possibility. As the days turned into weeks, Malik threw himself into his training with renewed determination. The program became more challenging, with complex projects that tested both his technical skills and his ability to work with others. Malik thrived under the pressure, surprising even himself. His instructors took notice, often calling on him to lead small teams during practical exercises. One project stood out, a full inspection of an airplane's electrical systems. Malik was assigned as team lead, working with a mix of seasoned students and newer recruits. At first he hesitated, unsure if he could handle the responsibility. But as the project unfolded, Malik's confidence grew. He delegated tasks, solved problems, and kept the group focused. When they presented their findings to the instructors, the team received high praise. For Malik, it wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. "You've got what it takes, Malik," Miss Garcia told him after class one day. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." But it wasn't just the program that was changing Malik's life. At home, Vanessa's new job brought stability and joy they hadn't experienced in years. She no longer worked grueling hours for little pay, and the strain that had once weighed on her features was replaced by a lightness Malik hadn't seen in a long time. Their small apartment, once filled with quiet worry, now buzzed with hope and plans for the future. One evening, as they sat together over dinner, Vanessa placed her hand over Malik's. "You've made me so proud, Malik," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you had something special in you, but seeing you step into it, it's everything I ever hoped for." Malik smiled, his chest swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Their bond, forged through hardship and love, was stronger than ever. Vanessa's sacrifices had paved the way for Malik's opportunities, and he was determined to honor that in everything he did. A few days later, Malik received a call from Grayson. The businessman's voice was as steady and encouraging as always. "Malik, there's an opportunity I think you're ready for," he said. "The program is offering internships for select students. It's competitive, but I believe you've got what it takes to secure one." Malik's heart raced. An internship would be a chance to take everything he'd learned and apply it in the real world. It was a step closer to his dreams, and a challenge he was eager to take on. "I'll give it my best, Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice firm. "I have no doubt you will," Grayson replied. "Let's make it happen." As Malik prepared his application, he reflected on how far he had come. From the scared boy who had shouted a warning on the tarmac to the young man now leading teams and preparing for an internship, his journey had been anything but easy. But every trial had shaped him. Every challenge had strengthened him. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Malik wasn't afraid of it. He welcomed the unknown, knowing he had the courage and resilience to face whatever came next. And as he looked ahead to this new chapter, he felt a quiet but powerful certainty. This was just the beginning.